Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 126, and we're going to take a look at the United States Marshals Service. This might sound a little familiar. We've touched on it previously in a couple of different episodes, but only because the United States Marshals Service is involved in a couple of different federal agencies because they provide law enforcement personnel in different areas within the federal government. So they do have an active role in several different capacities, but they do have their own federal agency. So let's go ahead and get started on this one. Their motto I found to be really interesting. Their motto is Justice, Integrity, and Service. They were formed or founded September 24th, 1789. In terms of where their headquarters is located, it is located in Arlington, Virginia. They have 94 marshals. They have 3,953 deputy marshals and criminal investigators. Their director is Ronald L. Davis. And to give a little bit of history, it says the United States Marshals Service, it is the oldest U.S. federal law enforcement agency created by the Judiciary Act of 1789 during the presidency of George Washington. So this goes back quite a bit. It says the Marshals Service is primarily responsible for the protection of judges and other judicial personnel, the administration of fugitive operations, the management of criminal assets, which I hope that they do audits on that because it's very easy to lose funds and for there to be criminal activity within these federal agencies when it comes to things like that. So I hope that they do an internal and external audit. It says they also handle the operation of the United States Federal Witness Protection Program. That's probably why this sounds a little familiar. And the Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, the execution of federal arrest warrants, and the protection of senior government officials through the Office of Protective Operations. They also help out with the United States Antarctic Program, so we've discussed a couple of different things with those as well. So this should sound a little familiar. It says federal marshals are most famous for their law enforcement work, but that was only a minor part of their workload. The largest part of the business was paperwork, giving writs, subpoenas, summonses, warrants, and other processes issued by the courts, making arrests and handling all federal prisoners. They also disperse funds as ordered by the courts. I think that's kind of a conflict of interest because of money, my personal opinion. It says marshals paid the fees and expenses of the court clerks, U.S. attorneys, jurors, and witnesses. They rented the courtrooms and jail space and hired the bailiffs, criers, and janitors. This is in terms of their origins going back in the day. They made sure the prisoners were present, the jurors were available, and that the witnesses were on time. Now, just FYI, this is during a time when all U.S. Marshals were men because women, they were not treated as equals to men way back in the day, unfortunately, and they did not have the right to vote. I'm not even sure how much property they could inherit or land or anything like that. So that's why this is very much founded in a very male-dominated kind of Victorian-era society. So it has changed over time. I hope that it's kinder to women as it grows older. That would be appreciative. In terms of the 19th century, it says during the settlement of the American frontier, which also includes Oklahoma, going all the way to California, marshals served as the main source of day-to-day law enforcement in areas that had no local government of their own. That would very much include the territory of Oklahoma when we were not a state yet, and any of the states going west. Now, it's very important to recognize that these U.S. Marshals kept people safe back then. One of the things that we had to deal with here in Oklahoma, and I have mentioned this before, is we had to deal with Indian tribal wars where Indians, Native Americans, they were just slaughtering each other. It was really horrible. So if the United States did not send out the army, which they did, that's why we have forts here, they also had U.S. Marshals to help control that violence and basically cease it, because it was hurting Native Americans first of all, but they were also killing white settlers. So in regards to Native Americans, so that's very sad about that heritage there. In terms of the history of Native Americans with that, it says, until its repeal in 1864, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 tasked marshals to accept an affidavit to recover a fugitive slave. That was very common back then. That's nothing new with that. It says in 1894, U.S. Marshals helped suppress the Pullman strike. So they did several different things in terms of their job. So it wasn't always just paperwork. It wasn't always just fugitives. There were so many different things that they did. So if you can imagine what all they had to deal with in terms of law enforcement. So there's a lot of things that they probably have to be trained on these days. Then we're moving forward into the 20th and 21st century. A little bit about their responsibilities here. It says, the Marshals Service is responsible for apprehending wanted fugitives, providing protection for the federal judiciary, transporting federal prisoners, protecting endangered federal witnesses, and managing assets seized from criminal enterprises. Again, I hope that they do audits on that, because whenever you're dealing with money, there's probably a high risk that the monies are not going to go where they need to go. In terms of the fugitive programs, it says the Marshals Service publicizes the names of wanted persons it places on the list of U.S. Marshals' 15 most wanted fugitives, which is similar to and sometimes overlaps the FBI 10 most wanted fugitives listed, or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives most wanted list, depending on the jurisdiction. The 15 Most Wanted Fugitive Program was established in 1983 in an effort to prioritize the investigation and apprehension of high-profile offenders who are considered to be some of the country's most dangerous fugitives. These offenders tend to be career criminals with histories of violence, or whose instant offenses, whatever that means, their offenses pose a significant threat to public safety. Current and past fugitives in this program include murderers, sex offenders, major drug pens, organized crime figures, and individuals wanted for high-profile financial crimes. In terms of the different groups or the different, I would say, programs that they have within their agency, there's a Special Operations Group. There's also an Office of Protective Operations. In terms of their training, they do pretty good training, I would say, and they handle firearms and have protective gear, things of that nature. They also have surveillance airplanes. I was not aware of this. They have quite a few surveillance airplanes, so they definitely spy on people, that's for sure. In terms of their organization, here's kind of how it trickles down. So you have a director of the United States Marshals Service. Then you have a chief of staff, Office of General Counsel, Office of Equal Employment Opportunity, a deputy director of the U.S. Marshals Service, a chief of district affairs, Office of Professional Responsibility. Then you have associate director for operations, which includes the Judicial Security Division, Office of Protective Operations. Then you have a deputy attorney general's protection detail. You have a secretary of education's protection detail. Then you have investigative operations division, the witness security division, the tactical operations division, prisoner operations division, justice prisoner and alien transportation system. Then you have a chief financial officer. Under that, you have financial services division. Then you have an associate director for administration. Under that, you have training division, human resources division, the IT division, Office of Public and Congressional Affairs, Management of Support Division, and Asset Forfeiture Division. I would definitely want an audit of the Asset Forfeiture Division, because whenever you're dealing with forfeitures, there unfortunately tends to be a high risk that people that have a badge will use their power in a way that is not ethical. We actually have that problem here with our sheriffs in Oklahoma. We have different counties, and there are some sheriff's departments that they love to shake people down for money, and they confiscate their monies and their properties, and they always blame it on drugs, even if there are no drugs involved. We have a lot of problems with that, and it's like pulling teeth to get your money and your property back. So basically, we have a sheriff's office that they don't follow the law, and it's very unfortunate, and they are notorious for it. So they get away with a lot of stuff that they should not. And unfortunately, they use their badge to do it. So that's very sad that happens here in Oklahoma. Hence, people don't carry as much cash as they used to, because they knew that if ever they got stopped by a sheriff or a sheriff's deputy, there's a chance they could be shooken down. And if you did not allow them to search you, which you do not have to allow a search, you have every right to deny it, because they have to have legal cause, and they have to prove they have legal cause. But if you decline a search, more than likely it's an illegal search, then they give themselves permission to steal from you. So that's been a problem here in Oklahoma. It's very unfortunate, because, we're in the Bible Belt, and we're also in the United States. I mean, we're not the Soviet Union or China, but yet, some of these people act like it because they have too much power. In terms of their personnel, they have deputy marshals. They have special deputy marshals. The Coast Guard has deputy marshals. There are court security officers. They have detention enforcement officers. They have inspectors. I'm trying to think of anything else this goes over. Their history goes back quite a ways. There is a movie that talks about what U.S. Marshals do, but it's not necessarily biographical. It's kind of fantasy driven, but the movie is Tombstone. It has Val Kilmer in it. It's a really great film. I saw that movie when it came out. It's one of my favorite films ever. But it does describe how some towns were run and how things were back in the wild, wild west, because it really was wild. And, just FYI, Europeans are fascinated with our history, and they think that the west side of the United States is still that wild. And I'm like, you have no idea. I mean, I've met Europeans that they think that Oklahoma still has Indians running around half naked and that they live in teepees. I'm like, oh my goodness, read a history book. That would be like me thinking that we still have the Holy Crusades or whatever going on in Europe or whatever, which, we obviously do not. But anyway, people are very much fascinated with our law enforcement agencies. Excuse me, my mouth is a little dry from the weather here because it's like 106 outside right now. But anyway, there's one thing that I wish that would be better in terms of our law enforcement, and this is across the board, whether it's state, federal, or county. I think we need to have more good cops, less bad cops. What I find interesting is that, Oklahoma has a lot of problems with finding good cops, but yet they do psychological testing. They also do interviewing, and they also have them take a polygraph test. Well, obviously, these tests have not been proving to deter bad people from becoming cops. So we need to find a better way to hire the right people. Another problem that we have, and I've mentioned this before in terms of law enforcement, they very much cover for each other. It's kind of like bros before hoes, almost like a frat house kind of thing, which I don't like saying that, but that's what it reminds me of. Because what happens is, let's say you have a cop, whether female or male, let's say they get in trouble and they do something wrong and they get fired, they lose their job, but they don't go to jail. What happens is they don't work for the city anymore, or they don't work for a city anymore. They may go work for a town, or maybe they move to like the sheriff's department. So all they do is they just move these bad people around from department to department instead of permanently firing them from the law enforcement agency field. And they just cover for each other. And what's sad is that whenever they cover for each other, it's almost always they are protecting someone that shouldn't be protected. They are basically protecting the wolf and not protecting the victims, the people that they hurt. This has happened time and time again. I wish this would stop because it makes it difficult for the public to believe in the integrity of law enforcement, regardless of which agency it is, regardless of whether it's state, local, federal, whatever the case may be. It just gets old. But unfortunately, they do things that are not right. And I really wish that they would reevaluate who they hire. And also another thing I don't like, and Oklahoma is notorious for this, and it's like, I just get irritated with this, that this still happens because we're in the Bible Belt, and you would think that if someone lives in the Bible Belt, that, people would behave a good and certain way, but obviously that is not true. It doesn't really mean anything anymore to say you live in the Bible Belt or to be located there because it doesn't reflect who people really are. Because I've met a lot of people that are hypocrites, whether they are Christian or not. I think the hypocrites that are Christian are worse than those that don't believe in God. Because when you say you believe in God, but yet you behave in a really horrible way and you violate someone else's rights and you don't really promote justice, that is a big problem. That's not being a Christian whatsoever. It's going to the dark side, and that's one of the problems that we have with law enforcement here. But one of the things that really bugs me is whenever there's a cop that does something bad, whether it's male or female, doesn't matter, because they're both guilty of doing stuff that's wrong. They know that what they did is true. They still have to investigate, but they know they have evidence of something that happened, and so instead of firing them, they put them on paid administrative leave. So basically these people that have done something really bad, whether or not they go to jail or not, they are paid, they're basically still paid their salary. So they still get really cushy benefits, whether it's a pension, 401k, health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, all this stuff. Well, guess who's paying for that? The taxpayer, which is you and me. That's not right. Here's the thing. If stuff like that were to happen, let me put it this way. That kind of stuff doesn't happen in the private sector. When someone's doing something wrong, they get fired. They don't get paid administrative leave. They get let go. And other companies, if they find out what this person did, they don't go, oh, we'll cover for you and hire them. They don't do that. I mean, just imagine if Dell, Apple, or Amazon had some really bad employees, they did something really bad, they fire them. I have never heard of these large companies or even small companies in the private sector putting someone on administrative leave, and they've gotten wind of something that really bad that this person did, and just pay them a bunch of money. They pay them their entire salary pretty much, but yet they're being paid not to work, not to show up to work. In the private sector, they fire people like that because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to fire bad people, but unfortunately, in the public sector, whether it's state, federal, or county, or even in the military is notorious for this. They don't fire the bad people. They either promote them or move them to another department or another agency, which gets so old because they keep recruiting bad people, which is poor decision making. One of the things I was not aware of until my 20s was that in the military, this happens all the time. I found out that in the military, if there's someone in their department that they don't like, they just promote them and move them to a different department. So just FYI, just because someone gets promoted, that doesn't mean they deserved it, and that doesn't mean that they are a good person. Because that happens all the time in the military. I forget what the phrase is called, but it goes back many years that the military has been doing this because they don't fire people. It's so weird. And sometimes, they need to kick people out of the military. It doesn't matter whether they are in the law enforcement part of it or not, but they don't do it. It's very rare. And they should take accountability for this and fire bad people, kick people out, because, whoever you keep that is bad, that's what you tolerate. And let me give this example. Let's take a look at these two different phrases. Let's say, I tell you I love you. How does that make you feel? You would feel endearment. You would feel probably the love of Christ, those beautiful, wonderful things. But if I say, oh, I tolerate you, is that love? No. Does that make you feel like I agree with what you're doing? No. But here's the thing. Whatever you tolerate is what you allow to contaminate. So basically, what these people are doing in the public sector and these law enforcement agencies all across the board, whether it's state, federal, or local, they're not doing the right thing because they're tolerating bad behavior. Whereas if they really loved someone, if they really loved that person, and I don't mean sexually, I mean like as a brother or a sister, if you love them, if they've done something wrong, you hold them accountable for what they did, and if they deserve to be fired, you fire them. See, because when you love somebody, you do what's right. When you tolerate somebody, you're doing what's wrong. That's the problem with a lot of these law enforcement agencies. They tolerate stuff because they don't have the guts to say, hey, that's wrong. You no longer can work here. What you're doing is inappropriate. We can't have that here. We want the best of the best. So they always settle, I always say, don't settle for less than God's best is how I word it. And that includes employees, managers, bosses, companies, whatever the case may be, because whatever we settle on is what we tolerate. There's a difference between saying, I love my job, I love my boss, as opposed to, I tolerate my job, I tolerate my boss. There's a difference there. And I don't mean love as in sexual or being a happy, peppy cheerleader or just roses and ivory every day or chocolates or something or flowers. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about dignity and respect and, having courage enough to call someone out on something if there's a problem. Because, when you love somebody, you want what is best for them, not what is worst for them. The worst thing you can do is tolerate bad behavior. Because I always find it interesting whenever people tolerate bad behavior as adults, but yet when their kid makes a mistake, they're training their kid, hey, you can't do that. It's like, well, you do that in your life as an adult, so how can you train your child that that's not right? Like you're being a hypocrite. Which these days, there are a lot of parents that are not even raising their kids appropriately. Why? Because they're settling for less than God's best. And I'm not trying to be religious, I'm just stating a fact. Because why would you settle for anything less than God's best? I don't get that. We are a Christian nation. We are one nation under God. We need to act like it. We need to be the people that God has called us to be. And to settle for anything less than God's best, it's not good enough. I'll just say it's not good enough. And, I'm speaking from Oklahoma, where we've had a lot of bad cops here. And it always concerns me whenever we have all these bad cops. I'm like, who's hiring these people? Someone's judgment is off. Who's promoting these people? Who's tolerating this? Oh, and here's another thing I don't agree with. Like, these departments such as the U.S. Marshals, they have investigative authority, right? Well, here's what people may not know. The Supreme Court actually made it legal. I don't know how long ago this was, but the Supreme Court actually made it legal to give police officers and law enforcement, gave them permission to lie to people. Basically, if you get pulled into an investigation or an interview with a cop, they have rights under the law. It's not moral, but they have rights to lie to you and say, oh, we have your DNA. So you might as well go ahead and give us your DNA so we can prove you innocent. That's not true. That's not true. They lie to people and they say, oh, we have your DNA, we have evidence. It's like, okay, prove it. Show me what you have, or tell my lawyer. See, that's why you can't talk to cops. That's why you never go into a interrogative interview without a lawyer. Even if you're innocent, and especially if you're innocent, because if you're being interviewed by a cop and you're innocent, there's a good chance they could do everything they can within their power and lie to do this to prove you guilty. Just to find someone to say, oh, we solved the case. Just because police officers and law enforcement say they found somebody or they know who did it, that doesn't mean they actually do know who did it. Because they have permission from the Supreme Court to lie, which is not right. And then we wonder why we have all these issues within different law enforcement agencies. They're given permission to be unlawful people. They're given lawful permission to be unlawful. They're given lawful permission to be immoral. They're given lawful permission to be unethical. There is no other profession that is allowed to do that. Like, let's say, for example, you are a CPA. Let's say you're a staff accountant. There are no laws that give you permission to lie to your client about their taxes or their social security number. You go to jail. You go to federal jail if you lie to a client like that. Or let's say you work at a bank and you lie to a client. Guess what? You go to jail. You go to prison. Nobody else is federally protected by the Supreme Court. They're not given permission to lie. It's only law enforcement. And then we wonder why we have so many bad cops. It's because they're trained to lie. They're trained to be dishonest. Well, here's the thing. Good people would never take a job like that. Because they don't want to be trained to lie. Because they want to speak the truth at all times. Our law enforcement needs to speak the truth at all times. And we need to change that law because it's not right. And then, law enforcement personnel, they wonder why, the general public doesn't completely respect them. It's because they do stuff all the time that's immoral, illegal, unethical, unprofessional. And it's like, well, if we're trying to have a high standard here and raise the bar, then why are we lowering it for people who's in a position of power and have a badge and a gun? That's a big problem. Because whenever someone is in a position of power, their standards should be higher, not lower. And they should never be given permission to do bad things, which is what the Supreme Court did. I'll try and find that court case and that law where the Supreme Court did that, because when I found out about it, my mouth dropped, because, over the years, I was like, how can any of this stuff be permissible in court? Well, the reason why it's permissible in court is because of what the Supreme Court decided on that. And it's not right. What's interesting is that whenever the cops are interviewing somebody, if that person lies, the person they're interviewing, they look guilty and or go to jail for lying to the police. But if the police lie, oh, they're doing their job. They're doing a great job. They're doing what's right. Here's another thing. If a witness lies, I guess when they're taking the witness stand and they're giving evidence or whatever the case may be and they're answering questions, if they lie, they can go to jail for perjury. But if a cop lies, they get a free pass. Any type of law enforcement, they get a free pass. They can lie. That's not right. That's not right at all. Like, if lying is wrong for this person, it's wrong for everybody. And here's another thing. I don't understand how cops or law enforcement in general, how they can be given permission to lie and be protected federally, but yet when they raise their kids, you cannot be lying. You need to tell us the truth. Really? I thought I could act like you. I thought I could lie about and be protected by federal law. No, it doesn't happen. If anything, the law enforcement, usually the husband, will beat the you-know-what other kid for saying something like that. But see, here's the thing. Law enforcement, they typically tend to say, do what I say, not what I do. That's a big red flag. that we've got a problem in our law enforcement all across the board. You know, it's kind of interesting that their motto is justice, integrity, and service. Well, how is there justice in lying to people just to try and trap them? That is far from justice. What about integrity? If law enforcement has permission to lie, they lack integrity. I mean, if you lie to your boss, is that integrity? No. If you lie to your spouse, is that integrity? No. I mean, it just makes no sense. And then service. You know, how is it a service to entrap somebody? It's wrong. And here's another thing. While law enforcement is busy lying to one person, trying to entrap them, they're not searching down and investigating the person that really committed the crime. Because they're too busy going after someone that is scared of the police, will say anything to get out of that building, and what they don't realize is that whatever they say will be used against them in a court of law. That's why you cannot talk to the police. Especially if they are interviewing you or recording you. You need to have a lawyer present, and you need to have a good lawyer. Not someone who's pro-police departments all the time. That's not right, because sometimes what lawyers do, and I don't like this, sometimes they'll work as a prosecutor for a while, and then they'll go to defending people. I wouldn't want that kind of lawyer. Because guess what? More than likely, they have been in the back pocket of the police department at one point or another. And let me get a drink of water because my mouth is dry. But I've just noticed that with lawyers, if ever they've worked as a prosecutor, you cannot trust them to defend you. Because they're going to be like, oh yeah, I know that person. Yeah, I know that cop, he's fine. It's like, no, they're not fine. So, lawyers, they're not exactly the most loyal people. Okay, drink of water. And that's really unfortunate because lawyers have the responsibility to help defend people. They have the responsibility to defend people and their rights, especially in the court system. That's why we have such a good judicial system. It's because we have barriers and we have rules, laws, and bylaws to protect the citizens. Our country wasn't founded to protect the police. It wasn't founded to protect a military. Just the opposite. It was founded to protect citizens from bad police, from bad military personnel. Because that's how the British were behaving. So our laws, our bylaws, and our legislation, it's gotten off track quite a bit because it's not protecting the people like it's supposed to. That's very unfortunate. Because it's enabling bad people to serve in positions of power that they have no business serving in. Because it's a question of integrity and character, and also good decision making. We need people that are wise, and that are kind and calm. How many cops do you know that are kind and calm and wise? I don't know any. None. And that's really sad. And I understand that their job is stressful, but if they can't take the job and the stress of it, they need to go work elsewhere. They need to find something else that works for them. That's all. Find a different job. But unfortunately, these recruiters, they keep recruiting the same kind of people. I mean, that's an HR issue right there. They need to get a different recruiter and find a different kind of people to hire. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to be a revolving door of bad cops and situations. And I don't just mean local cops, because obviously law enforcement personnel can be in any division, state, federal, local, marshals, deputies, sheriffs, police departments, military police, whatever the case may be. But just because someone wants to be a cop, that doesn't mean they should be a cop. Because I've met a lot of guys over the years, they want to be a cop, but I have never met one that wants to be a cop for the right reasons. It's always to be a bully to regular everyday people that are just living their lives. We don't need to pay bullies to be bullies. We already have bullies in society. The last thing we should do is give them a badge and a gun. I think that's a big problem. I think if we restructured some things and really focused on human rights, I think things would get a whole lot better, because I think we need to get back to our original founding. We were not for policing. We were against it technically. We were not for a huge police department. That's not the founding of our country at all. Because that's what the monarchy would do. They would police people. And they were brutal to people. So we need to get back to our roots. We need to get back to what matters for our country and really care about the United States. We really need to focus on what is important to America. And we need to focus on the rights of the citizens. Because if we don't focus on the rights of the citizens, then our country ceases to be free. And that can turn really bad really quick. So let's continue to focus on the freedoms of this country and focus even more so on it as opposed to enabling bad people in positions of power. We need to work on that because I've noticed it here in Oklahoma. I've noticed it in the Bible Belt. And if I'm noticing it, then I bet it's everywhere in the United States. Because sometimes things like trends and stuff, they take a couple years to reach Oklahoma. We've had problems with our judicial system for many years. I mean, I can remember weird cases when I was a child. I was like, they arrested who? For what? It was just bizarre stuff. And that was back in the 90s when I was a little girl. Well, late 80s, early 90s. That goes back a long time, right? I mean, I'm not old, but that just tells you how long this has been a problem with our judicial system here in Oklahoma, whether it's state or federal. So we definitely need to work on having equal rights, good rights, focus on our freedoms, and protect our freedoms. Because if we do not protect our freedoms, then it's not good. Because then you will enable really bad people to dominate and rule your life, and we were not founded for that. We were founded for freedom, for liberty, for everyone. So I will go ahead and end this podcast. But until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.